The first Keller sentinel spotted them when they were still 50 meters from the cave entrance. Morrison raised his hand slowly, making sure his rifle remained slung across his back, and called out in the few words of Keller language that Private Santos had taught him during their approach. "We come in peace. We wish to speak." The sentinel, a young Keller, whose natural camouflage made him nearly invisible against the crystal formations, remained motionless for several seconds. Then he whistled a complex series of notes that echoed through the caves. Within moments, a dozen more Keller appeared as if materializing from the rock itself. Morrison kept his hands visible and his movements slow. Behind him, his 4 Marines maintained similar non-threatening postures. Santos stepped forward slightly and spoke in fluent Keller, her natural aptitude for languages having allowed her to master the basics during their reconnaissance. "She's telling them we're different from the other off-worlders," Chun whispered, "that we want to understand." An elderly Keller emerged from the cave entrance, moving with the careful dignity of advanced age. Her skin bore the intricate patterns that Morrison had learned indicated high status in Keller society. Santos continued speaking, and Morrison caught enough words to understand she was explaining their purpose. The elder listened intently, then responded with a series of clicking sounds and melodic whistles. Santos translated, "She says they've been expecting soldiers to come kill them. She wants to know why we're different." Morrison stepped forward carefully. "Tell her that Marines protect families. We don't make war on children." Santos relayed this message, and Morrison watched the elder's expression change from suspicion to cautious hope. She gestured toward the cave entrance, speaking rapidly. "She's inviting us inside," Santos said. "She wants us to see what they're protecting," Morrison nodded. "Chun, maintain communications with base. If this goes sideways, I want a full record." As they entered the cave system, Morrison was struck by what the Keller had created. The natural crystal formations had been carefully shaped and polished to create living spaces that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Families had arranged their belongings around the formations, creating private areas while maintaining the communal feeling of the space. Children played among the crystals, their laughter echoing softly through the chambers. Parents worked at various tasks, preparing food, maintaining equipment, teaching the young. It was a community, not a military installation, the elder led them deeper into the caves, where a large chamber held what was clearly their most precious possession, a massive crystal formation that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. The patterns seemed to tell a story, shifting and changing in response to the presence of the Keller around it. Santos listened to the elder's explanation, her expression growing more serious with each word. Finally, she turned to Morrison. "Gunny, this is their archive. Every bit of their history, their culture, their knowledge is stored in that crystal formation. It's been growing for over 1,000 years, adding new patterns with each generation." Morrison stared at the living library, understanding flooding through him. "And the mining operations?" "Scheduled to reach this exact location in 3 weeks, Santos confirmed. The assembly corporations classified it as mineral resources and ordered its extraction. Morrison felt pieces falling into place. The sabotage. Attacks? Desperate attempts to slow down the mining? They've been trying to buy time to negotiate, but nobody will listen to them. Hayes stepped closer to examine the crystal formation. "Gunny, this isn't just cultural heritage. Look at those patterns. They're incredibly complex. This could represent advanced knowledge, maybe even scientific discoveries we haven't made yet." Morrison nodded slowly. The Keller resistance wasn't terrorism, it was preservation. These people weren't fighting against progress. They were fighting to save their entire civilization's accumulated knowledge from being ground up for industrial profit. His communicator crackled. "Morrison, report your status immediately." Vextar's voice carried sharp irritation. "You've been out of contact for 30 minutes. Morrison exchanged glances with his Marines. "Base, this is Morrison. We've established contact with the local population. Situation is more complex than initially briefed. Explain." Morrison looked around the cave, at the families, at the children, at the living library that represented 1,000 years of knowledge and culture. Sir, the resistance isn't military in nature. These are civilians protecting cultural sites from industrial destruction. Irrelevant? Vexstar snapped. Your mission is to neutralize the resistance, not analyze their motivations. Execute your orders. Sir, request permission to negotiate a peaceful resolution? The pause that followed stretched long enough that Morrison thought the communication had been cut. Finally, Vexstar responded, you have 4 hours to achieve compliance through negotiation. If unsuccessful, we will implement orbital suppression. Morrison clicked off his communicator and turned to Santos. Tell them we have 4 hours to find a solution that protects their archive and satisfies the Assembly. What followed was the most intensive negotiating session of Morrison's career. Working with the Keller elders, his Marines mapped out a proposal that none of the alien observers had considered. Controlled mining that would avoid the cultural sites while providing the resources that the corporations needed. Hayes used her analytical training to calculate extraction yields that would be only marginally less profitable while preserving the cave systems. Kim identified defensive positions where the Keller could maintain security over their archives. Chun established a communication network that would allow real-time coordination between the mining operations and the Keller communities. Santos served as translator and cultural liaison, ensuring that both sides understood the nuances of the proposed agreement. Morrison coordinated the overall strategy, drawing on 15 years of experience in situations where conventional solutions hadn't worked. Gunny, Chun reported after 3 hours of intensive work, I think we've got something, but it's going to require the Assembly to recognize Keller territorial sovereignty over the cultural sites. Morrison smiled grimly. Let me worry about the Assembly. He activated his communicator and requested immediate conference with Vexstar and Wispara. When the alien observers arrived at the cave entrance, they found Morrison's Marines standing in formation with a delegation of Keller elders. What is the meaning of this? Vexstar demanded. Where are your prisoners? Sir, there are no prisoners, Morrison replied. We've negotiated a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Wispara floated closer, its tentacles expressing agitation. Impossible. The resistance leaders must be arrested and transported for trial. Morrison gestured toward the elder who had first welcomed them. This is Elder Shamira, the democratically elected representative of the Keller communities. She's prepared to sign a formal ceasefire agreement that will end all sabotage activities in exchange for recognition of Keller sovereignty over designated cultural sites. Vexstar's mandibles clicked angrily. The mining operations have legal contracts. They cannot be modified to accommodate primitive cultural concerns. Respectfully, sir, the contracts can be modified to work around the cultural sites with minimal impact on productivity, Hayes interjected. I've run the calculations. Furthermore, Kim added, the Keller communities are prepared to provide security for the mining operations in exchange for guaranteed protection of their archives. Vexstar looked from the Marines to the Keller delegation with obvious confusion. This is not how peacekeeping operations are conducted. You were ordered to neutralize the resistance, not negotiate with them. Morrison straightened to his full height. Sir, the mission was to restore order and end the civil unrest. That has been accomplished. But the resistance leaders have agreed to cease all hostile activities and cooperate with lawful mining operations under the terms of the proposed treaty. Morrison interrupted. The civil unrest is over. Wispara's tentacles writhed frantically. This is completely irregular. The Assembly protocols require arrest and detention of rebel leaders. Santos stepped forward and spoke directly to Wispara in perfect galactic standard. Honored observer, with respect, Assembly Protocol 93 specifically authorizes field commanders to negotiate peaceful resolutions when such negotiations serve the greater stability of member worlds. Morrison looked at Santos with surprise. She'd memorized Assembly protocols during the trip. She continued, furthermore, Assembly Charter Section 12 requires recognition of indigenous cultural rights when such recognition doesn't interfere with legitimate commercial operations. Vexstar and Wispara exchanged confused glances. Morrison realized that they'd expected the Marines to fail spectacularly, not to succeed through methods that technically complied with assembly law while completely subverting assembly expectations. The agreement requires assembly ratification, Vextar said finally. Already submitted through proper channels, Chun announced, holding up his communication device. I transmitted the complete proposal to Assembly Headquarters 30 minutes ago with supporting documentation and legal justification. Elder Shamira spoke, and Santos translated. She says the Keller people are grateful to the Marines for listening when no one else would. Gunnery Sergeant Mike Morrison had seen a lot of strange things in his 15 years with the Corps, but stepping off the transport onto an alien space station still ranked near the top of the list. The Keller System's orbital command center hummed with activity as beings from a dozen different species went about their business, most of them stealing curious glances at the human Marines filing off their transport ship. Stay tight. Marines, Morrison called softly to his platoon. Remember, we're representing more than just the Corps here. The Marines moved in perfect formation through the station's corridors, their polished dress blue uniforms drawing stares from every direction. Morrison had insisted on the dress blues instead of combat gear for their arrival. First impressions mattered, and he wanted these aliens to see Marines, not soldiers. Behind them walked their assembly observers, a Thraxian combat specialist named Vextar and a Zephyrian tactical analyst called Wispara. Morrison could practically feel their skepticism radiating from every step they took. Gunny, Corporal Janet Hayes whispered as they walked. The local briefing materials are ... interesting. Morrison nodded grimly. The Keller system consisted of 3 inhabited worlds: Keller Prime, an industrial planet with massive mining operations; Keller Beta, an agricultural world that fed the entire system; and Keller Gamma, a research station that had recently become the system's governmental center. The civil unrest had started on Prime, spread to Beta, and was now threatening to destabilize Gamma. The problem was more complex than the assembly delegates had let on. This wasn't simple civil unrest, it was a carefully orchestrated campaign of violence and sabotage that had brought commerce to a halt and left the local government paralyzed. Gunny! Morrison, a voice called from behind them. Morrison turned to see Vextar approaching, his massive frame making the station corridor seem cramped. We must discuss the operational parameters before deployment. Of course, sir, Morrison replied, maintaining proper military courtesy. Despite his personal feelings about their situation, they gathered in the station's briefing room, where a holographic display showed the 3 Keller worlds in detail. Vextar activated the display with a casual gesture, his 4 eyes scanning the human Marines with obvious doubt. The situation has deteriorated since your departure from Earth, Vextar began. Sabotage attacks have increased on Keller Prime, and there are reports of organized resistance cells forming on Beta. The local government has requested immediate intervention. Morrison studied the tactical display carefully. What's the scope of the resistance? Numbers, equipment, organization? Wispara floated closer to the display, its tentacles writhing with what Morrison had learned indicated concentration. Approximately 2,000 active militants across both worlds. They possess standard civilian equipment, nothing more sophisticated than basic industrial tools and improvised explosives. Transportation? Asked Staff Sergeant Jennifer Park, Morrison's second-in-command. Civilian vehicles primarily. Some stolen cargo haulers. Nothing military-grade. Vextar-S mandibles clicked dismissively. The Assembly's standard protocol for such situations involves orbital deployment of neural dampening fields and targeted energy strikes to disable their equipment. Morrison frowned. Orbital strikes? In populated areas? Precisely targeted, Vextar assured him. Our energy weapons can disable equipment without harming organic tissue. Very clean, very efficient. And very visible, Morrison murmured. Something about this situation bothered him, but he couldn't put his finger on what. Your mission parameters are simple, Wispara announced, its translated voice carrying formal authority. Deploy to Keller Prime, identify the resistance leadership, and neutralize their capability to disrupt commerce. You have 7 standard days to achieve complete pacification. Staff Sergeant Park raised her hand. Rules of engagement? Assembly Protocol 47, Vexstar replied. Minimum necessary force only. No permanent harm to sentient beings unless absolutely required for self-defense. All actions must be logged and reviewed. Morrison nodded slowly. Understood. We'll need detailed intelligence on the target areas and civilian population centers. Already prepared? Wispara said, transmitting data to their portable devices. The resistance is concentrated in 3 primary areas on Keller Prime. We recommend sequential operations clear one area, move to the next, maintain pressure until they surrender. Morrison reviewed the intelligence files as his Marines gathered around. The Keller inhabitants were humanoid but smaller than humans, with natural camouflage abilities that let them blend with their rocky, mountainous environment. They were highly intelligent but had never developed advanced technology, preferring to live in harmony with their planet's natural systems. Gunny, Corporal Hayes said quietly, something doesn't add up. Look at the sabotage targets. Morrison examined the data more carefully. The attacks had focused on mining equipment, processing facilities, and transportation networks, all infrastructure that belonged to off-world corporations, not local Keller businesses. The resistance isn't attacking their own people, Morrison realized. They're targeting foreign operations. Vexstar overheard this observation and nodded impatiently. Obviously. The local population has been influenced by radical elements who oppose assembly, membership, and the economic opportunities it provides. They must be educated about the benefits of galactic commerce. Morrison's expression darkened. He'd seen this pattern before in a dozen different conflicts across Earth's history. Sir, with respect, have we verified that these radical elements aren't actually defending their legitimate interests? Gunny, Wispara interjected, its tentacles stopping their constant movement. You are here to restore order, not to question assembly policy. The Keller system requested membership, and we are providing the stability necessary for successful integration. Morrison bit back his first 3 responses. Understood, sir. When do we deploy? Immediately. Transport ships are standing by to take you to Keller Prime. As the Marines prepared for departure, Morrison pulled his squad leaders aside for a private briefing. Listen up, Marines. I've got a feeling this situation is more complicated than our observers want us to believe. Keep your eyes open, follow road, but be ready for anything. You think it's a setup, Gunny? Asked Sergeant Alex Chun, the platoon's communications specialist. I think the assembly expects us to fail, Morrison replied. But I also think they might not understand what failure looks like to Marines. The transport to Keller Prime took 6 hours, during which Morrison's Marines reviewed every piece of available intelligence. By the time they reached the planet's surface, each Marine knew the terrain, the civilian population centers, and the locations of every reported resistance cell. What they found when they landed was not what they'd expected. Keller Prime was beautiful. The planet's surface was covered with towering crystal formations that caught and refracted sunlight into spectacular rainbow displays. The native Keller had built their cities to blend with these natural structures, creating settlements that seemed to grow organically from the landscape itself. The damage from the industrial operations was immediately obvious. Massive strip mining operations had carved ugly scars across entire mountain ranges. Chemical runoff from processing plants had turned pristine streams into polluted wasteland. The contrast between the natural beauty and the industrial destruction was jarring. Jesus, whispered Private First Class Rodriguez as they disembarked from their transport. What did they do to this place? Morrison surveyed the scene with growing unease. Their landing zone was at the edge of a mining complex that stretched to the horizon. Hundreds of massive machines tore at the planet's surface while native Keller workers operated them under the supervision of various alien species. Gunny Morrison, Vexstar announced, approaching with his usual confident stride. The first resistance cell is located approximately 15 kilometers north of here. Intelligence indicates they're planning another sabotage attack tonight. Morrison checked his tactical display. The target area was a cluster of natural crystal caves where approximately 50 Keller were reportedly hiding. Standard assembly protocol would involve surrounding the area and using sonic disruptors to force them out for arrest. Sir, request permission to conduct reconnaissance before any direct action. Vexstar's mandibles clicked with irritation. Reconnaissance is unnecessary. We have complete intelligence on their position and capabilities. Respectfully, sir, I prefer to verify intelligence with direct observation. It's standard marine procedure. Wispara floated closer, its tentacles expressing what Morrison now recognized as condescension. Gunnery Sergeant, you have 7 days to complete this mission. Wasting time on unnecessary reconnaissance will only delay inevitable failure. Morrison's jaw tightened. Sir, if we're going to do this job, we're going to do it right. I'm taking a small recon team to observe the target area before we commit to any action. Very well, Vexstar said dismissively. But remember, we will be monitoring your communications and logging all activities for review. Morrison selected 4 Marines for the reconnaissance mission, Sergeant Chun for communications, Corporal Hayes for her analytical skills, Lance Corporal David Kim for his marksmanship abilities, and Private First Class Maria S. Ambassador Elena Rodriguez tried not to wince as the Thraxian delegate's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his species. The sound echoed through the crystalline chambers of the Galactic Assembly, joining a chorus of similar noises from the other alien representatives. Each species had their own way of expressing amusement, but the message was universal and unmistakable. They were laughing at humanity. Surely you jest? Ambassador Rodriguez, the Thraxian said, his translated voice carrying a tone of condescending amusement. Your species wishes to contribute military forces to the Assembly's peacekeeping initiatives? The same species that has barely mastered faster-than-light travel? Elena's jaw tightened, but she maintained her diplomatic composure. Around the circular chamber, representatives from dozens of worlds watched the proceedings with varying degrees of interest and skepticism. The Zephyrians floated in their environmental suits, their tentacles writhing with what she'd learned indicated derision. The crystalline Mordakians chimed softly, their bodies refracting light in patterns that somehow managed to seem mocking. Honored delegates, Elena began, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest. Humanity may be new to the galactic community, but we have extensive military experience and proven combat effectiveness. This statement triggered another wave of alien laughter. A Corvan delegate, resembling a cross between a bear and an octopus, spoke up from across the chamber. Combat effectiveness? Against what? Your own primitive species? We have reviewed your historical records, human. Your warriors fight with chemical projectiles and crude explosives. Some of your soldiers still use bladed weapons. The Thraxian nodded his massive head, his 4 eyes gleaming with superiority. The Assembly has maintained galactic peace for over 3,000 standard years using advanced energy weapons, quantum disruption fields, and neural dampeners. What could your, Marines, possibly contribute to such sophisticated warfare? Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. Respected delegates, if you would examine our complete military records, we have interrupted the Zephyrian representative, its voice a whistling sound through its translator. Impressive for a primitive species, perhaps, but we face threats that require precision, technology, and advanced tactical thinking. Your Marines appear to be primarily focused on what you call aggressive assault tactics and overwhelming firepower. Such crude approaches have no place in modern galactic conflict resolution. The chamber filled with murmurs of agreement. Elena looked around desperately, seeking even one sympathetic face among the assembled aliens. The Assembly had been humanity's goal for decades membership in this prestigious organization that governed trade, diplomacy, and security across dozens of star systems. Earth had spent enormous resources developing FTL technology and establishing diplomatic relations. All for this moment, and it was falling apart. Perhaps, said the Mordakian delegate, its crystal body chiming melodiously, the humans could contribute in other ways. Their agricultural techniques show promise, and their entertainment media has certain quaint qualities. More laughter. Elena's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Honored delegates, I must insist that you reconsider. Humanity has survived and thrived through countless conflicts. Our military forces have adapted to every challenges appropriate to your technological level. The Thraxian cut her off. Tell me, Ambassador, have your Marines ever faced an enemy with plasma weaponry? Have they encountered force fields that can deflect your primitive bullets? Can they fight in zero atmosphere against opponents who can phase in and out of dimensional space? Elena's mouth went dry. The honest answer was no. Humanity's conflicts had been entirely terrestrial, against human opponents using human technology. But she'd studied the reports, read the tactical assessments. There had to be something. Our Marines are adaptable, she said finally. They've shown remarkable ability to learn new techniques, master unfamiliar equipment, and succeed in unexpected situations. Given proper briefing and equipment, adaptation is not enough, the Corvan delegate rumbled. Modern galactic peacekeeping requires split-second decisions, perfect coordination with advanced AI systems, and the ability to neutralize threats without unnecessary destruction. Your species shows admirable enthusiasm. But enthusiasm cannot substitute for centuries of technological advancement. Elena felt the weight of failure settling on her shoulders. Earth's military leaders had been so confident. Admiral Chun had assured her that the Corps' reputation would speak for itself. General Martinez had provided extensive documentation of Marine victories across every type of terrain and conflict imaginable, but none of that mattered here. In this chamber full of beings who saw humanity as barely evolved barbarians. If I may, Elena said, making one last attempt, our Marines have never failed to complete a mission when properly deployed. Their success rate in hostile environments is unprecedented in human history. They've operated in Arctic conditions, desert wastelands, urban warfare zones, jungle environments, all on one planet, the Zephyrian pointed out dismissively. With one atmosphere, one gravity level, against opponents of the same species. Such limitations hardly qualify them for galactic peacekeeping operations. The Thraxian delegate leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over Elena's position. Ambassador Rodriguez, we appreciate your species' eagerness to contribute to galactic security. However, the Assembly cannot risk its reputation or the safety of its member worlds by deploying inadequately equipped and inexperienced forces. Perhaps in a century or two, when humanity has developed more sophisticated military capabilities. We understand your concerns, Elena said desperately. But surely there must be some way to demonstrate our capabilities. Some small operation where our forces could prove themselves. Silence fell over the chamber. The alien representatives exchanged glances, or what passed for glances among species with multiple eyes, sensory tentacles, or crystal-based perception. Elena could practically feel their collective condescension. Finally, the Mordakian delegate spoke, its voice carrying harmonics that somehow conveyed reluctant consideration. There is one situation. A minor peacekeeping operation that we've been monitoring. Not particularly dangerous, but requiring a certain finesse. Elena's heart leaped. We would welcome any opportunity to serve. The Keller system, the Thraxian said slowly. 3 inhabited worlds recently joined the Assembly. They've been experiencing what you humans might call civil unrest. Nothing that requires serious intervention, merely a show of force to discourage further violence. Elena nodded eagerly. Our Marines are experts at peacekeeping operations. We could deploy a company-sized unit within 1 platoon, the Corvan interrupted. 40 of your Marines maximum. And they will be accompanied by Assembly observers to ensure they follow proper protocols. Elena's diplomatic training warred with her growing anger. 1 platoon? To represent all of humanity's military might? But she forced herself to nod. Acceptable. When would deployment begin? Immediately, the Zephyrian said. Our intelligence indicates the situation may escalate within the next few standard days. Your Marines will have exactly 1 week to restore order using approved assembly methods. No excessive force, no unauthorized tactics, no deviation from established peacekeeping protocols. The Thraxian's mandibles clicked again. When they fail, as they inevitably will, perhaps your species will understand why membership in the assembly requires more than primitive enthusiasm. Elena straightened her shoulders. And when they succeed? If by some remarkable chance they succeed, the Mordakian chimed, we will reconsider humanity's application for military participation in assembly operations. Elena bit back the dozen responses that came to mind. Instead, she bowed formally to the assembled delegates. Thank you for this opportunity. You won't be disappointed. As she turned to leave the chamber, she caught the unmistakable sound of alien laughter following her out. Every delegate in the room was convinced they'd just sentenced a group of human soldiers to humiliating failure. They saw it as a kindness, really a gentle lesson that would teach humanity its proper place in the galactic hierarchy. Elena activated her communicator as soon as she reached her quarters. Priority transmission to Earth Military Command. Authorization Rodriguez 77 Delta. Admiral Chun's weathered face appeared on the screen within seconds. Ambassador, how did the presentation go? Elena's expression told him everything he needed to know. They've given us one chance, Admiral. 1 platoon, 1 week, 1 operation. If our Marines fail, humanity's military application is finished. Chun's eyes narrowed. What's the mission? Peacekeeping in the Keller system. 3 worlds, civil unrest, assembly oversight. Elena paused. They expect us to fail, Admiral. They're absolutely convinced that our primitive Marines can't handle galactic-level operations. A slow smile spread across Chun's face. Ma'am, with all due respect to those alien delegates, they have no idea what they've just unleashed. Elena felt a flicker of hope. You think our Marines can handle it? Ambassador, every Marine I've ever known would consider this the opportunity of a lifetime. 40 Marines against an entire star system's problems with the galaxy watching. Chun chuck.